So in 2016, the OCC announced that it was thinking about giving out charters to FinTech companies. And the OCC is the federal agency that has authority to give out banking charters that are national in scope. And it had never given any out to FinTech companies, just to banks. But because FinTech companies are engaging more and more in banking-like activities, the OCC decided that it needed to think about whether it should issue these national charters to a FinTech company. And on July 31st, it announced that it made the decision and it's going to start accepting applications from FinTech companies to get these new FinTech charters. So a FinTech charter is a little different than a banking charter. And one of the ways in which it's different is that banking charters are for institutions that engage in all of the core traditional aspects of banking. And that includes paying checks, lending money, and taking deposits. But a lot of FinTech companies don't do all of those things. In particular, a lot of them don't take deposits. And so a FinTech charter will basically enable a company to engage in the business of banking, even if it doesn't engage in all three of those. So it may just be a payments company, it may just be an online lending company, and once it receives this charter, it will be regulated by the OCC and authorized to nationally engage in that form of activity. So you might be asking, why would FinTech companies want to be regulated by another government agency? They already exist, they're already doing businesses, so why would you submit to that? And there's two main answers. The first answer is that the alternative is often worse. The alternative can be getting lending licenses and money transmission licenses from every single one of the 50 states that are out there. So instead of having one national regulator, you have 50 different regulators that are all asking you different questions and imposing different requirements on you. And so a huge advantage potentially is if you get this FinTech charter, you can do business in all of the 50 states and you won't have to be separately regulated. You'll just have one regulator. The second big advantage is that you potentially have access to Federal Reserve payment systems, and that can, for FinTech companies that are engaged in the business of payments, that can really lower their operating costs and make them run more efficiently. So getting a FinTech charter isn't like snapping your fingers. It's a serious process that involves several different phases. There's a preliminary phase where you go in and meet with the OCC and talk about why you're applying for a charter and what the process is going to be like. The application process itself is very rigorous. You submit business plans. You need to vet members of management, talk about your liquidity and capital and why you're going to meet the requirements that the OCC might impose. And then even if you're given a charter after that, there's very rigorous examination processes. So regularly, the OCC will send people down to your place of business, talk to management, sometimes review books and records that you have within the company, and that can be burdensome. But it's often less burdensome than going through similar processes with 50 different state regulators. And so that's one of the things that anyone thinking about engaging with this process just needs to balance, is whether or not the burden that comes with this process would be less than the burden that they would otherwise have to go through with all of the states. So state regulators are really a wild card here. When the OCC came out a couple years ago and announced that they were thinking about issuing these FinTech charters, the states sued them. And so state regulators issued multiple lawsuits to try to block the OCC from issuing a FinTech charter. And the federal courts dismissed those lawsuits as being premature. They said because the OCC isn't yet issuing these charters, it's not going to consider whether or not to block them from doing so. But now that the OCC has said they intend to accept applications and issue the charters, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the state regulators reinitiate those suits. And once those suits are filed, that could have an impact on the value of a federal charter to a FinTech company.